when Jim Crow laws came about, it was telling you that we don't want you in what we doing. It was the law.
I mean, it's like, whoa. And the Klan rose, right? The Klan, when was the Klan the strongest? Think about it. They all came converged together. The Klan was the strongest after the Civil War, right? Because they had to put who in check? Had to put us in check. Oh, niggas free. Them niggas, they're free now. We gonna keep them, let's figure out a way. Every state in the Union concocted all kind of, they call it black codes or Jim Crow laws. And every one of them was to strip us of our humanity, strip us of our right to vote, strip us of our ability to own property. All these, you go study these, that period, Louisiana, no exception. In fact, Louisiana would lead the pack. Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, all kind of state legislation all over the South would pass these laws to put it, to hem us up, to draw it out. And we, against all that pressure, against all that oppression, black folks still was able to force their way through all that bullshit. Right?
We had the Italian family. All they had to play with was little black children too. So, which sounds stupid, they used to pass for black because they didn't want to go sit up in the white section of the movie because they didn't have anybody up there to play with. So they would come down, go up and sit with us because there wasn't anybody down. You knew they weren't black children. Let's say that. But it was okay. We enjoyed each other. That was our friends.
Well, I lived in Goodtown, and the white people at that time would kidnap you if you were sitting out on the steps. They would practice to be doctors, and they would practice on you. You know what they do? They throw you in the trunk of a car, Buick. 37 Buick was a big trunk of the vehicle. It was that car, and they'd catch 2 or 3 of you, destroy you, and then zoom off to Baton Rouge. In those days, because like I was being interviewed one time, and a person, now you ought to know, you know that didn't happen. I said, what had happened to me? And my grandfather came out with a shotgun and shot in the air, and the trunk of the car went up, and my brother had hollered, Grandpa, Grandpa, they got Samson, Grandpa. And he came out and shot in the air with a gun, a big old rifle, double barrel, and they got me out of there. And so we used to sit out on the step on Fauquier Street at 7815 Fauquier Street, right across from a church called Philip and Murphy. All of that's still there. And the white people used to come right looking in those big cars. And if they could get you, they'd get you. And that was back in the 30s when you can't imagine.
I was invited to a dance at on Coin Street. I did not know where Coin Street was. I was all around Coin High School looking for Coin Street. I'm talking about 1953. So I was all out on Magazine Street. And the white policeman passed, nigga, what you doing out here? I'm looking for Coin Street. They left. They came back about 30, 40 minutes later. I'm still walking around. Nigga, where you work at? Because I always big for my age. Well, I go to school. What school you go to? What MF in school you go to? That's what they asked. I go to Booker T. Lord, nigga, the school of thieves. Nigga, don't you ever let us catch you up here. That was the biggest lie that ever been told. The biggest, because you didn't come in Booker T no any kind of way.
If your mom and them in the church knew, or a pastor knew a midwife who would help you deliver the baby, they would do that. But in my case, my mother was a young girl, not more than 15, and she was having a baby, and they told her, you know, sometimes the mother's lost, sometimes the baby's lost. So they asked my grandmother, what do you want? You want the baby or you want your daughter? See, because this is going to be a terrible one. We're going to have to just about cut her in half. My grandmother had raised so much hell because they didn't want my daughter, or my grandmother didn't want her daughter killed to have a baby born, and my mother didn't want me killed to be born, so she could be okay. So they put him in jail at the 1st Precinct. where Charity Hospital is now. You know the big Charity Hospital? That was the first jail precinct. And they put them from raising hell around there. Blacks had no rights. Any little thing you said, you went to jail. So my grandmother then was staunch fighters from Gertown. They had all the people throwing rocks at the building and what have you. So on July the 20th, they decided to do this thing. And it was in the States Item. There was a paper here called the States Item. And I was a 15 pounds, some ounces baby, born on July. And I got a picture up here of it, of me, and I had a big bald head, and I was like that. And I was like about like I was 1 year old, you know, and because I really was growing in the inside. Well, that was common with black women in those days because they had no help. They'd go down and beg at that Diamond building on Tulane and Claiborne, where they all had about 100 women hanging around, and they're trying to get somebody to help them deliver their babies. And so if they thought you was a smart girl, and that they said, well, we're not gonna help you, you're one of them smart Alex, you know. So say, well, come here, young lady, we'll try you, somebody else, you know. But they didn't have treatment where you go over and see the doctor every month, you know, like y'all do now. They didn't have that. It was an alley where you went. You didn't really go to the hospital. You just went to the hospital where the hospital was, begging for a little help to, if somebody would take pity on you and help you. You know, in those days, actually, because you all in a modern society now, but you had no rights to at all, and a black woman dying was not no big thing. They just moved the body and called an undertaker called Gaddis and Moss, which is Gaddis Jackson Avenue now, but the name was Gaddis and Moss. And he'd come get the body and bury it down there, at a very cemetery called Green Street.
My mom's dad was French, blonde hair, blue eyes. My mom's mom was an Indian mixture, easily recognizable as African American. People were so racist back then. My grandfather had a China store, and the finest china, and my mom had some of it, but they also lost a lot of it. And the people in Bay St. Louis at the time were so angry that he married my grandmother that they burned his store down. Yes.
Why segregation in the South, and particularly in New Orleans and Louisiana, was different than Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. It was a different kind of segregation. Here, the whites and blacks almost was one. They lived together. It was the whites, and you'd have white girls and black boys, and you know, they all were mixed up. See, but not in Mississippi and Alabama and those places. There are three kinds of whites. There are the whites where your mother was the help, and they go work for them. They were judges and lawyers on St. Charles Avenue and what have you. And then they had the whites who were racist whites who hated blacks at no matter what, they hated you. You understand? Then they had the poor whites who used to work and do the same thing that my grandmother, my mom, and my uncle and all them used to do. They were down, you understand? They'd be raking the yard like my grandpa would be raking the yard. The three kinds of whites. The blacks was looked upon as being ignorant and not really a person. They were half a person, according to the whites. They wasn't really a person like the white people were. They was almost a person, you understand? And so we blacks understood how they felt, but they didn't know how we felt. And so we always outmaneuvered them. And when they tell us to feed the dog, my grandmother said, before you leave this evening, and we'll feed those chops and steaks to that big dog. And my grandmother said, okay. And when they leave, my grandmother would tell the dog, say, see this big steak? You'll never get this on your lips. I'm taking that home to my grandchildren. When the white people would hire my grandmother to, when they had to go out and take the little babies out for a little air on the avenue, you'd see all the black women sitting on the avenue with the little white babies. And if they had to go on the streetcar, they would ride in the front of the streetcar where the white people rode with the white baby. But coming back home at the evening, they had to ride in the back where the black people were. You know, they couldn't ride in the front anymore at that, you know, because they didn't have the little white baby. Well, after the Civil War, the blacks were free. They had free blacks down in Treme, and they were carpenters and what have you, and they knew how to work. They had the trades and they were bricklayers. You see all the nice bricks in the French Quarter. That was done by free blacks. Well, blacks, including Frederick Douglass, who ran off the plantation and at that time and learned to read and write as best he could, never stopped trying to be free. Never. That black there had been transferred down from after we got free with the Emancipation Proclamation. That black kept transferring to the next black. Then the next black, the thought of being free and equal and with equality. You see, but then when we got to the 60s, it stopped, and then the 70s and 80s and 90s, it's no more. We're no more.